Hello everyone, welcome to Kubernetes series on the Spring Cloud. In today's video, we will look into the config map. So those who have worked on the Spring Cloud projects, they may be aware that Spring Cloud config provides a client-side support for externalizing configuration in the distributed systems. With config server, you have central place to manage external properties for all applications. And this centralized approach is beneficial for managing all the microservice properties. So we are also going to use a config for server for the same purpose. So if you look at it, a config server that is created with a simple approach where we are using a Spring Cloud config server and in the PROM properties, and also in the application Spring Boot application we are using a enable config server. So that will make sure that our config server is enabled and all the properties that is been placed at some location on my computer, and these properties are related to all the microservices that we are going to use in the Spring Cloud project. For example, the flight service for different environment, passenger service for different environment, then Eureka server for dev QA environment. I will start a config server in my local and we will see how we can get the properties. So meanwhile, I'll also show you that what are the properties that we can see for the flight. So there are quite a lot of property that related to the applications that we will be using. For example, the flight service. Flight service has some Spring Boot application properties, JPA properties, and H2 database connection property, and other properties that we will, when we are discussing about the flight service, we will get to know. But these are all the properties. And for example, we already started a config server. Now let us go ahead and check in the Postman. So here is my Postman and it is running on the port 8888, the flight service, and the default, let's say I want to fetch the default property of the flight service, so I should be able to fetch the default property. Similarly, I can fetch the QA properties as well. So here the QA property, and with that it has also fetched the default property as well. I can similarly fetch the dev property as well. So here what it is doing is it is getting the file from flight service dev, flight service QA, and flight service default. Similarly, we can get the detail for the passenger service as well, and similarly we can get for Eureka server and the other properties as well. Okay, so here if you look at it, I can fetch the property for the passenger service as well. So here I am fetching the dev properties of the QA of the passenger service. Similarly, I can get a QA property as well. So basically we can fetch all the properties using the config server. So if I want to convert this into the Kubernetes manifest file, so what are the things I need? First of all, if you look at this in my config server, if I look at the properties, I need to create the volume, correct? Because at some place in my local directory these files are residing, and I need to inform the config server that where to pick up these files. So for creating the volumes, what we will be doing is we will be creating the persistent volume and persistent volume claim. If you don't have much idea about that, what are those, so if you can go to my other series for the Kubernetes on the on the Kubernetes with the volume, and you should be able to get the more details. And I think in the same video I have similar example I have taken for that as well. So you can go ahead that. Here what we will do is we will create the manifest file for the persistent volume. Okay, we may also need a common config map which can be used by all the manifest files. So what I am doing is I have created a common config map with the name application config, and I just have added one property here, spring profile dev for now, and as we need more and more property we'll start adding that. Now I also have created one pvpvc file where if you look at this pvpvc file, I have got two Kubernetes objects. One is a persistent volume and one is a persistent volume claim. So regarding all the tags, we already have discussed in another spring I think Kubernetes volume series, and you can refer to that one if you have doubt in any of the tags. So this is my kind, this is persistent volume. I have given the name as a ticket host pv, and the capacity is 1 GB. I am assigning to this my persistent volume. The storage class I have used as a standard, and volume mode as a file systems. And I just need the read only, but I'm still using the read write ones. Then this is my local path from where it is going to refer to the all the files, and this is my directory. So this is the configuration, manifest configuration for the persistent volume. Now I also need the persistent volume claim as well. So I'm creating the persistent volume claim. The kind is a persistent volume claim, that the name is a ticket host persistent volume claim pvc. The volume name that I am referring is ticket host, right? The same name that I am referring here. The storage class name is a standard. Then access mode. So I am using the same access mode that I have defined in the persistent volume here. And total capacity that I have given is a 1 GB. Out of that, this persistent volume claim is using 500 MB storage capacity. So I also at max I can only provide the 1 GB storage. Then for my Kubernetes manifest file, I also need the config server. So here is my config server deployment and the service object. In this one, if we go one by one, what we have done is a kind is a deployment, then I am giving the name as ticket service config server and deployment name, right? And the label also I am giving the same. Then specs, I also want only one replica of these for now, so I am giving the one replica set, and the selector that I am using as a ts config, and this is the same selector as the app label name, right? This is the same one. So inside the specs I need the template metadata and the labels. So here the app name I am giving the name as ts service and the label as a app. This is a key value pair. Inside this one I have got a spec, and the container, that container name I am giving as a ts config server, and the image that I am using is cup of java tech ticket service config server that I already have generated using the docker file. If you look at this, the docker file already has this is like ticket service docker file, ticket service config server that I already have created and already have pushed into the Docker Hub. So I can use that same image right here. The image pull policy that I want to use is always also the port that I am using, this is the application port that I am using is this server port, right? Then the volume mount, the local volume mount that I have defined into the Docker file is app config, right? The same I need to define it here, and this is going to refer to a persistent volume that we come later. But here there are few environment variable that I want to use, and these environment variables are coming from the config map, right? So here is a application name. So what is the environment variable that I am using? The config server application name. So I don't have that environment variable yet been defined here. So what we will do is we will define that environment variable here. Okay, so config map application name that I can define into my config map. So here is, and what is the name of my application is ticket service config server, right? That I have used. And another environment variable is config server volume. In this one, what I need is the name of the volume that I am using, and what is that? This one. Okay, so I already defined that right here, and where is my, okay, here. So these are the properties that I need. So all the properties, common properties that we may need, that I will be defining into the common config server. So it's right here. Then the volume that I need to use, the volume I need to provide the persistent volume claim that I am using. So what is the persistent volume claim I am using? If you look at it, this is ticket host PVC. And this is the ticket host PVC persistent volume claim that I am using. So what it will do is persistent volume claim, it goes here, and from here it will check which persistent volume it is using. So it is using the persistent volume, this one. And persistent volume claim is what type of persistent volume it is using. This is the host path, and what is it referring to? A directory, that is this particular directory. Okay, so now this is all we need for the configuration for deployment. Okay, similarly I will also need the service object. So service object details also I am providing right here. So API version is v1 for the kind service, right? Then I am giving the name, that is ticket service config server service, and the selector is this is the same selector as the one that we have defined into metadata part of the template in specs template. Okay, then what is the port it is exposing? If you look at it is exposing the port 8888, and also the target port that I want to expose the service to, and that is also 8888. So this is all we need for the config server. So we have created 3 files. I have created a config map, persistent volume claim, and the persistent volume and config server deployment and the service objects. Now let us deploy all the manifest file and see it in action. So kubectl apply -f1. I will also deploy the persistent volume and persistent volume claim. You can check config map is deployed. So my config map, application config map is deployed. At the same time we can also get PV. Okay, so my PV is also been created. I can check PVC. So my PVC is also being created. So all these are created. Now we will deploy a config server container and the service object as well. So deployment object and the service object. Both of them will deploy together, -f, and that is a third file, kubectl apply -f and this. So now it is creating a config map pod. So now my service is also running, right? So we can go to the Postman and check it. Are we able to access all the property files? Okay, now see, if we check it, we are able to access the property file. Again, I can check for the flight service as well. I should be able to access. So I am able to access dev, QA, also the ticket service also. I should be able to access all the properties. So this is how we can deploy the service objects, deployment object, and the persistent volume claim and all those objects. So this is all about the config server deployment, and in the future video we will look into other microservices deployment. Thank you for watching this video.